Thanks for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another rewind edition of my podcast, and today I will be rewinding Me Against the World by Tupac. Now, this is my favorite Tupac album that was released almost 30 years ago to the date. It was released on March 4th of 1995. So in a couple of weeks, next week, it'll be officially 30 years old. Now, this album was recorded prior to Tupac's prison stint and he recorded it prior to going into prison, but it was released while he was in prison. So uh, when he was in prison, he talked about how guards were mocking him and said, "Oh, you're not this fancy guy now, huh?" He said, "Well, actually, my album's #1 in the country." So that was pretty funny that when he talked about that in the documentary that was released posthumously in the theaters. Um, but he said during this album, Me Against the World, of course, the title sounds personal, but he intended this album to sound more personal and more reflective than his previous albums. His more albums were kind of like scattered. It had some personal parts, but it had party songs and it had like just straight for the street songs. But this album was intended to have a messaging behind it, which I appreciate always from the hip hop albums. It was intended to uh, give his current status. Now, this album I don't think was intended to be geared towards mental health, but it kind of gave us a glimpse of what a hip hop album geared around mental health sounded like. And he was able to eloquently state his point on this album. And I'll go through the songs that I'll talk about in which he expressed those feelings. But like you said, this album was meant to be personal. I remember Lil Wayne saying during his height of his career, doing like 07, 08, and they asked him what is key to success, and he said to make everything personal. And this is what Tupac did, made everything personal, and it made the album sound better. And I think this is his best. Well, I know this is his best project in my opinion. So, um, this album sold 3 million records to date. Now that's physical sales, not including streamings and things like that. But this album was just an intro to his life, his autobiography, and he talked about so many things that during this album that you really didn't need a documentary. This album narrowed everything down. Why Tupac the way he was, and everything that he felt so passionate about. So the intro of the album starts off very emotional because this was after he had got shot, I believe, 5 times in New York City, and he thought he was set up by some people. And it talked about how he left the hospital early, slimming his chances of surviving, and all of the emotion that went through it. And it played enough different news feeds. And of course, there was no rapping. There was a little music in the background, but it was mostly the news feed or the news reporters talking about Tupac leaving the hospital early after being shot. And then, of course, the next song, If I Die Tonight, which is a song full of tongue twisters and illusions of people plotting against him. And everything was just so poetic in this song, poetry in motion. Some of my favorite hip hop skills put at display. He did it in this song, If I Die Tonight. So you have to appreciate that. And of course, a lot of the production on this album was done by Easy Mo Bee, who ironically did the Tupac Me Against the World album, and he did Biggie's debut album, Ready to Die. So he did a lot of projects in this early mid 90s period. He worked with both artists on these projects, and they were both very classic albums. So Easy Mo Bee was very influential on this album, and Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die album. And then Me Against the World, which is a Minnie Riperton single. Rest in peace to Minnie Riperton. And this song also appeared on the Bad Boys movie, the first one with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. So this song was one of my favorite. It was self-titled from the album. You have to always love those albums because usually that's their best work on the album. But unfortunately, that wasn't the best song on this album, and I'll get to that reason why later. But this song, Me Against the World, explained in this album, just explained his current mindset of trying to be the villain or painting himself as a villain. Just because of the alleged betrayal that he felt from Notorious B.I.G. in that camp, and just his roles on Juice and Above the Rim. And I talked about this before in the Inside the Scope edition when I covered Tupac, about how he got typecasted as this villain and he became to start to think himself of that way just because the characters that he played and how much effort and time he put into it. He started believing himself as that character. So Many Tears, which is, like I said, one of those great songs addressing mental health and addressing it and just, not keeping yourself bottled up and getting those emotions out there. Very classic song. Then you have a Temptations, which he changed the mood to talking to a woman and having a softer side. And he's openly talked about being a Gemini and, talked about the dichotomy of being a Gemini, how you have a softer side and you have a more turtle shell side where you're more, you don't give too much is about anything, and you can be against the world and you have that side, but at the same time you want to be loved. So it was the dichotomy of being a Gemini. Then the song Young N-Words, where a song where Tupac, you know, has sent a message in this one, and he talked about his love for the youth and how he want to help the youth and how you shouldn't be trying to grow up too fast. You have time to do that and just, take it day by day and just take his time to settle down. That was very emotional because he brought up Robert Sandifer, who tragically died at the age of 11 years old to gang violence in Chicago. Very sad story. And he brought up his name to talk about, hey, you got young guys think y'all got it figured out. You need to take time and figure things out and just live your life and become a kid, and just everything will come when it comes. So, very strong message. Like I said, Tupac's songs always have that messaging. He didn't need to be lyrical because he had messaging and actually had things that he needed to talk about and influence the youth and just others alike. And now, Dear Mama, which was probably the most important song on this album, when he talked about his relationship with his mother and what she meant to him, and how no matter how difficult things were, they always found a way to get back to each other. And he always loved his mom for what she was. And his mom was everything to him. You could tell from the song. There's also been a documentary, a Hulu documentary built around this, and it talked about how this song influenced Kendrick Lamar, the rapper Common, and Eminem, and amongst others that have been wrapped in the influence in the hip hop game. And the song was also unique because it was inducted into the National Recording Registry by the Library of Congress. So a lot of recognitions for that song, even though like there was some vulgar language in it, but it still doesn't get away from the point of the love he had for his mom and what she meant to him and how she helped shape him as a man, and how her contributions made him who he was today. So that was the most important song on this album. And like I said, it really didn't seem like it fit on the album talking about me against the world, but in the context, it was him and his mom against the world. He felt, she did all these things for him and was influential and helped raise him as a man. So this album kind of fit in context when you think about it that way. And then, of course, the next song, he gets back to his me against the world thing, where he had F the World, classic Pac track, rapping with his back was against the wall. Some of his best rapping on the album was on this song, where he just like spilled his guts out and just let everybody know his emotions and where he was at currently, his current mental state, where he was. So a lot of those songs did that. This was a great concept album as well. Death Around the Corner is another song that was very good, that he talked about the prophecy that he always thought he was going to go early. He spoke about the circumstances in his life and the way he saw things, even if people saw it differently. This is his version of everything. So it was very unique and interesting to see, but he was very honest and open and transparent on this album, it appeared. And then, of course, Outlaw closed the album out, and he put the cherry on top of the album with this one, just questioning if he can be saved from his unique circumstances. And this song, he used a sample from Snoop Dogg's Murder Was the Case. Very great song, album that I'll have to cover pretty soon. One of the top 10 hip hop albums of all time. But I think this Me Against the World album is one of the top 10 projects in hip hop of all time that had strong messaging, influential messaging, but at the same time gave us the street side and that Tupac side that a lot of people loved in the popular culture, from him just going at people and just being ruthless, no pun intended. So, as always, thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. And until next time, I'll see you next time.